A humble cleaner, armed with nothing but a crumpled envelope, was about to be publicly destroyed by a ruthless billionaire CEO. The man's cruel laughter echoed in the opulent hall, a sound designed to crush the spirit of the poor boy who dared to stand in his world. But when the secret inside that envelope was finally revealed, the laughter froze on the billionaire's lips. The silence that followed was more shocking than any scream, for in that moment a shocking truth emerged that would bring an empire of arrogance to its knees. The city awoke in a symphony of cold steel and hurried footsteps. But for Leo Vance, the morning began with a much quieter, more personal ritual. It started with the weary sigh of old floorboards beneath his feet and the faint, persistent scent of medicinal herbs that clung to the air in his small, cramped apartment. The room was a testament to a life lived on the margins, a space defined not by what it had, but by what it lacked. A single, bare bulb cast a weak, yellow light over thin walls, a lumpy mattress on the floor, and a small, wobbly table that held the two most important things in his world: a framed, faded photograph of his grandmother, her smile still bright despite the years, and the chipped mug he used for his morning coffee. He prepared the coffee with practiced care, a bitter, instant blend that was more about the warmth than the taste. It was a meager luxury, a small shield against the damp chill that seeped through the window frame. As he sipped the dark liquid, his eyes drifted to the photograph. His grandmother, Elena, was the anchor of his existence, the quiet sun around which his difficult world revolved. Her illness was a shadow that had fallen over their lives, a relentless thief, stealing her strength day by day. The doctor's words were a constant, grim echo in his mind. A costly, complex surgery was her only hope, a hope that felt as distant as the moon. Leo was a cleaner, an invisible man in a city of giants. His uniform, a plain gray jumpsuit, was his cloak of anonymity. Every day he journeyed into the heart of the beast, the glittering downtown core, a world so far removed from his own it felt like a different planet. He worked at Thorn Tower, a colossal monument of glass and hubris that scraped the sky, owned by a man as cold and hard as the steel that formed its skeleton, Marcus Thorn. That morning, something was different. A heavy anticipation sat in the air, thick and unsettling. Before leaving for the bus, he reached for an old, yellowed envelope that lay on the table. It had arrived a week ago, on his 25th birthday, sent by Mr. Tomas, his late grandfather's oldest friend and lawyer. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were a cryptic promise. Inside was a single folded document and a short handwritten note from the old lawyer. "Leo," the note read, in a spidery, elegant script, "your grandfather Elias was a great man, a man of quiet strength and deep integrity. He told me to give you this when you turned 25 and were in your greatest need. He said you would know when the time was right. This is not a gift, my boy. It is a key and a responsibility." A key to what? Leo had stared at the document for days. It was filled with legal jargon he couldn't comprehend, referencing something called the Vanguard Trust. It felt like a relic from another life, a puzzle from a man he barely remembered. His grandfather Elias had passed away when Leo was just a boy, leaving behind only fragmented memories of kind eyes and the smell of old books. He had been a simple man, a historian or a librarian, Leo thought. What kind of key could a man like that possess? His grandmother's cough from the other room, a dry, painful sound shattered his thoughts. The time of greatest need was not some abstract future. It was now. The surgery costs were a mountain, and he was at the bottom with no way to climb. He had decided. Today, he would take the document to the Grand Bank on the ground floor of Thorn Tower. He would not go as a cleaner, but as a man seeking help. He would ask for a loan, using this strange inheritance, this key, as whatever meager collateral it might represent. It was a foolish, desperate plan, born of love and helplessness, and he knew it. But it was the only plan he had. He folded the envelope carefully, tucking it into the inner pocket of his worn jacket. He pulled on his thin coat, the fabric threadbare at the elbows, and gave his reflection a brief, uncertain look in the cracked mirror by the door. He saw a boy trying to wear the face of a man, his eyes holding a depth of worry that did not belong to someone so young. He was just a cleaner, a ghost in the machine. What could he possibly hope to achieve in the lion's den? He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. For his grandmother, he had to try. He had to walk into the fire. The bus ride was a familiar blur of gray streets and tired faces. Each stop brought him closer to the glittering, indifferent heart of the city. When he finally stepped off the bus and stood before Thorn Tower, he felt the same wave of insignificance that washed over him every day. The building was an arrogant spike of wealth, its reflective windows like 1,000 cold eyes staring down at the common folk on the street. It was designed to make people feel small. Today, it was succeeding splendidly. He usually entered through a service door in the back alley, a world of dumpsters and steam vents. Today, he walked toward the main entrance. The massive, revolving glass doors spun like a gateway to another dimension, a world of polished marble, hushed whispers, and the faint, expensive scent of success. For a moment, his courage faltered. He was a stain on this pristine canvas. His worn clothes, his cheap shoes, his very presence felt like a violation. But then the image of his grandmother's frail, sleeping face filled his mind, and his feet began to move. He pushed through the doors and stepped inside. The lobby of the Global Commerce Bank, which occupied the entire ground floor, was a cathedral of capitalism. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, adorned with a crystal chandelier the size of a small car. The floors were a gleaming expanse of black and white marble, reflecting the cold, recessed lighting above. Men in tailored suits and women in sharp, elegant dresses moved with a sleek, predatory grace, their voices low and confident. It was an ocean of luxury, and Leo felt like he was drowning. He stood near the entrance for a long moment, clutching the envelope in his pocket, feeling the frantic beat of his heart against his ribs. He was a ghost here, too, but a different kind. Not invisible, but conspicuous. He could feel the sideways glances, the subtle, dismissive assessments of his attire. He was an anomaly, a piece of grit in the flawless machinery of wealth. He took a steadying breath and made his way toward the information desk, his steps feeling loud and clumsy on the silent marble. Just as he was about to speak to the receptionist, a sudden commotion near the main entrance seized the attention of the entire hall. The revolving doors spun faster, and a man strode in, not just entering the space, but conquering it. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and a cruel, self-satisfied smirk was permanently etched onto his handsome face. This was Marcus Thorne. He was not alone. He was flanked by a small entourage of younger men in equally expensive suits, their expressions a mixture of fear and fawning admiration. They laughed a little too loudly at his quiet, cutting remarks to the bank's security chief, who was practically bowing as he greeted him. Thorne moved through the lobby like a king inspecting his domain, his eyes sweeping over everything with an air of bored ownership. He radiated a sadistic power, an arrogance so profound it seemed to suck the very air out of the room. "Is everything prepared for my transaction, Henderson?" Thorne's voice was a low growl, accustomed to instant obedience. He did not look at the bank manager, a portly man who had scurried over, sweating profusely. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, everything is in order. The private suite is ready for you," Henderson stammered, his face pale. Thorne waved a dismissive hand, not even gracing the manager with a glance. His gaze continued its imperious sweep of the lobby, and then his eyes landed on Leo. Leo had been momentarily frozen by the spectacle, an unwilling spectator to this display of raw power. He had turned his attention to a glass display case in the center of the lobby. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a massive, leather-bound ledger. A small brass plaque identified it as the founding ledger of the city's first merchant guild, a priceless historical artifact donated to the bank. Leo, a lover of history inherited from his grandfather, was captivated by the ancient script, the weight of the centuries it represented. Thorne's smirk widened into a malicious grin. He saw not a young man admiring history, but a rat mesmerized by a piece of cheese it could never have. He changed his course, striding directly toward Leo, his entourage following like a pack of hyenas. The low hum of the bank fell silent as everyone turned to watch. A public execution was about to take place. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Thorne's voice boomed, dripping with theatrical contempt. He stopped a few feet from Leo, looking him up and down as if he were a particularly disgusting insect. "Look at this, gentlemen, a little street urchin, lost and far from his gutter. Did you wander in here by mistake, boy? The soup kitchen is 3 blocks west." His followers erupted in mocking laughter. The sound was sharp and cruel, echoing off the cold marble. Leo felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. His face burned. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. He said nothing, simply lowering his gaze. His silence only emboldened Thorne. "Look at him staring at the founding ledger," he sneered, gesturing dramatically at the display case. "Are you dreaming, boy? Dreaming of a world you will never be a part of? A world of legacy, of power, of wealth? What could you possibly know of such things? Your greatest legacy will be the grime you leave behind on the floors you scrub." The laughter grew louder, more vicious. People in the lobby watched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. No one intervened, no one dared. This was Marcus Thorne's stage, and he was the star of this cruel play. "Tell me," Thorne said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "What is someone like you even doing in a place like this? Don't tell me you have an account here. The minimum deposit would be more than your entire pathetic family has earned in 3 generations." That was it. The mention of his family. It was a line crossed, a sacred boundary violated. Something inside Leo, something that had been bent and compressed for years under the weight of poverty and quiet dignity, finally snapped. The shame vanished, replaced by a sudden freezing calm. The fear was gone. In its place was a core of pure, unyielding steel. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting Thorne's for the first time. Leo's gaze was not filled with hatred or anger. It was clear, steady, and strangely empty, as if he were looking at an object, not a man. This silent defiance infuriated Thorne more than any shouted retort could have. "What's this? The little rat has teeth?" Thorne chuckled, though the sound lacked its earlier mirth. He was annoyed. "You think you're better than me? You, in your rags?" Leo's voice, when it came, was quiet, but carried an astonishing weight in the silent hall. "I came here on business." The sheer audacity of the simple statement sent a ripple of shock through the onlookers. Thorne stared for a second, then threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a terrible, ugly sound. "Business! Did you hear that? The cleaner has business in my bank." He wiped a tear of mirth from his eye. "All right, boy. I'll play your little game. It's been a dull morning. Let's make it interesting." He turned to the crowd, his arms spread wide. "I'll make a public wager, a bet for all of our amusement." He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Leo. "If you can prove right here, right now, that you have any holding in this institution, any account, any trust, any asset, worth more than the mud on your pathetic shoes, I will give you my entire company, Thorne Industries, everything." A collective gasp went through the room. The offer was insane, a piece of theatrical madness. "But," Thorne continued, his voice turning sharp and sadistic, "when you fail, and you will fail, you will get down on your hands and knees, and you will lick my shoes clean right here in front of everyone. You will show this city what your kind is truly worth." He held out his foot, displaying a shoe made of gleaming black Italian leather. The silence that followed was thick with tension and cruelty. All eyes were on Leo. They saw a trapped animal, a boy about to be utterly and irrevocably broken for sport. This was the final nail in the coffin of his humiliation. Leo looked at Thorne's smug, expectant face. He looked at the laughing sycophants. He looked at the silent, watching crowd. He thought of his grandmother, of her quiet strength in the face of suffering. He thought of his grandfather and the mysterious envelope that felt like a burning weight in his pocket. A key, Mr. Tomas had called it, a responsibility. Was this the moment? Was this the time of greatest need? A cold certainty washed over him. He had come here to beg for a loan, but fate, it seemed, had offered him a war instead. He took a slow, deliberate breath. The war had begun. "I accept your challenge," Leo said. The words were not a plea, but a judgment. A hush fell over the bank lobby, a silence so profound it seemed to press in on them from all sides. The nervous, cruel energy that had filled the air moments before was gone, replaced by a dense, electric tension. Marcus Thorne's triumphant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. He had expected begging, tears, a pathetic retreat. He had not expected this quiet, chilling acceptance, but the surprise was quickly smothered by his own towering arrogance. This was just a better show. "Excellent!" Thorne boomed, clapping his hands together in mock delight. "The little mouse wants to roar. Let's not keep our audience waiting." He gestured grandly toward the main banking hall. "The stage is yours. Go on. Dazzle us with your immense imaginary fortune." His entourage snickered, their confidence restored by their master's bravado. The onlookers shifted, their expressions a mix of morbid curiosity and a sliver of pity. They were about to witness a young man's complete and utter devastation. It was a tragedy, but it was also a spectacle. Leo did not look at them. He ignored the whispers, the stares, the palpable weight of their expectations. His world had narrowed to a single, clear path. He turned and walked away from Thorne, his steps no longer clumsy, but measured and firm. He walked not to the general teller windows, but toward the private client services area, a section of the bank cordoned off by a velvet rope and overseen by a stern-looking woman in a sharp blazer. Her name tag read, Evelyn Reed, Branch Director. He stopped before her desk. Miss Reed looked up, her expression one of professional annoyance. She had witnessed the entire ugly scene, and she had already dismissed Leo as a delusional troublemaker. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone crisp and dismissive, clearly intending to send him on his way. Leo did not flinch. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the old yellowed envelope. His hand was trembling slightly, but his voice was steady. "I need to access an account," he said simply. He slid the envelope and the folded document within it across the polished surface of her desk. Miss Reed eyed the crumpled, aged paper with disdain. It looked like something fished out of a trash can. This was a waste of her time, a waste of everyone's time. With a sigh of theatrical impatience designed to be seen by Thorne, who was watching with a predatory grin, she picked up the document. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the first few lines with a bored, perfunctory glance. And then she stopped. Her posture, once so rigid and dismissive, went slack. Her eyes, which had been narrowed in irritation, widened. She read the first paragraph again, more slowly this time. Her professional mask dissolved, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Her gaze darted from the document to Leo's young, serious face, and back again. A flicker of something unreadable. Confusion, shock, perhaps even fear, crossed her features. Without a word, she turned to her computer terminal. Her fingers, which a moment ago had been resting idly, flew across the keyboard with a sudden, frantic urgency. She typed in a series of codes, her knuckles white. The entire bank watched, captivated by her silent, intense activity. The only sounds were the soft clatter of her keys and the heavy, expectant breathing of the crowd. Thorne, still standing by the ledger display, crossed his arms. The confident grin remained plastered on his face, but it had become strained, a brittle facade. A tiny seed of doubt had been planted. This was not going according to his cruel script. The cleaner was supposed to be stammering, crying, admitting defeat. He was not supposed to be standing calmly while the bank director worked as if her life depended on it. On the screen, lines of text and numbers appeared. Ms. Reed leaned closer, her face inches from the monitor. She let out a small, involuntary gasp. She scrolled down, her eyes growing wider with every line. The document in her hand was not a joke. It was not a delusion. It was real, and its implications were staggering. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the marble floor. She stood up slowly, her movements stiff, robotic. She looked first at the computer screen, then at the ancient paper in her hand, and finally at Leo. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard, her composure completely shattered. "Well?" Thorne's voice cut through the silence, sharp and impatient. "Is the boys' piggy bank empty? Let's get to the shoe shining, shall we? I have a board meeting to attend." Ms. Reed turned her head slowly to face him. Her face was pale, as if she had seen a ghost. The disdain was gone, replaced by a profound, trembling awe. She looked at Marcus Thorne, the most powerful man in the city, not as a subordinate, but as if she were seeing him for the first time. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, the words coming out stronger, ringing with a newfound authority that stunned everyone. "This young man—" She paused, gesturing a shaky hand toward Leo. "He is Leo Vance." She took a deep breath, letting the name hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, earth-shattering blow. He is the sole heir and beneficiary of the Vanguard Trust. The name of the trust meant nothing to the average onlooker, but to Marcus Thorne it was a thunderclap. His smug expression vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of raw, unfiltered shock. His face drained of all color. Ms. Reed wasn't finished. Her voice grew louder, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of Thorne's world. The Vanguard Trust. It was established in 1985 by Mr. Elias Vance. She looked directly at Thorne, her eyes filled with a terrible, dawning understanding. And its primary asset, which has been compounding in a blind holding for nearly 40 years, is 49% of the voting shares of Thorne Industries. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The cruel laughter that had echoed through the hall just minutes before was now a ghost, a memory. It died on Thorne's lips, frozen in a grotesque, silent snarl. His entourage stood paralyzed, their faces blank with incomprehension and fear. The crowd of onlookers was a sea of slack-jawed, staring faces. The air itself seemed to have solidified, thick with a shock so potent it was almost visible. 49%. The number was impossible. It was a fantasy. Thorne Industries was a public company, but Marcus Thorne's control had always been absolute, built on a majority stake inherited from his father, or so he had believed. Leo Vance, the cleaner, the invisible boy, the street urchin, did not just have an account in this bank. He was, for all intents and purposes, the bank's most powerful client. He was Marcus Thorne's partner. No, not his partner, his owner. With 49% and the ability to sway even a fraction of the remaining public shareholders, Leo Vance held the fate of Thorne Industries in the palm of his hand. Thorne stared at Leo, his mind reeling. The boy's face was unchanged, the same calm, steady expression, but now it looked different. It was not the emptiness of a victim. It was the quiet, terrifying confidence of a king who had just checkmated a loud-mouthed pawn. The bet, the insane, arrogant bet. "If you can prove you have any holding, I will give you my entire company." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. His own words, his own hubris, his own trap, snapping shut not on the mouse, but on the cat. The world tilted on its axis. The cleaner in his threadbare jacket was no longer a cleaner. He was a titan, hidden in plain sight. And Marcus Thorne, the billionaire CEO, the king of the city, was suddenly, terrifyingly, nothing. His empire, his legacy, his very identity now rested on the whim of the boy he had just tried to destroy. The silence stretched on, a heavy, expensive silence that cost Marcus Thorne everything. The frozen tableau in the bank lobby finally shattered. It was not a sound that broke the spell, but a movement. Ms. Evelyn Reed, the bank director, took a step forward. She picked up the velvet rope separating the private client area and unhooked it with a decisive click. She was no longer just a bank employee. She was an arbiter of a seismic shift in power. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice imbued with a deep, newfound respect that bordered on reverence. Please come this way. We have much to discuss. We will need my office." She turned to a junior associate whose mouth was still hanging open. "Get Mr. Vance a coffee, and not that swill from the machine, from the private reserve." Leo gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and walked past her into the exclusive area, the space he was meant to clean, not occupy. He moved with the same quiet dignity as before, but now everyone saw it differently. It was not the meekness of the poor, it was the quietude of the powerful. Marcus Thorne finally found his voice. It was a ragged, strangled sound, a pale imitation of his former booming command. "This is impossible! It's a trick! A fraud!" He snarled, his face contorted in a mask of fury and denial. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. "That boy is a nobody, a charlatan." Ms. Reed turned to face him, her expression now as cold and hard as the marble floor. The fear she might have once felt for this man was gone, burned away by the sheer magnitude of the truth she had uncovered. "Mr. Thorne, the documentation is impeccable. It has been authenticated by our legal department and the original signatories decades ago. The trust is ironclad. It was established by Elias Vance, your father's original partner." The name Elias Vance struck Thorne like a physical blow. It was a name from a ghost story his father used to tell, a story of a brilliant but naive partner who was cleverly outmaneuvered in the company's early days. His father had always spoken of it with a smug pride, a testament to his own superior cunning. He had seized full control, buying out his partner for a pittance. He had assured everyone, his son included, that every share, every asset was accounted for. He had been wrong, horribly, catastrophically wrong. Elias Vance had not been outmaneuvered. He had been betrayed, and he had planned his revenge not with anger, but with the cold, patient precision of a master strategist. He had hidden his most valuable asset, the core of his ownership, in a place no one would ever think to look, in a blind trust dormant for decades, waiting for his heir to come of age. It was a financial time bomb, and it had just detonated in the heart of Marcus Thorne's empire. "I'll have your job for this, Reed," Thorne bellowed, his composure cracking completely. "I'll have you blacklisted from every financial institution in this hemisphere. I will ruin you." "You no longer have that authority, Mr. Thorne," Ms. Reed replied, her voice unwavering. "As the representative of the largest single shareholder, Mr. Vance is now the one to whom this bank and your board is primarily accountable. If anyone is in a position to be ruined today, I assure you it is not me." This clinical, brutal statement of fact seemed to suck the last of the air from Thorne's lungs. He staggered back a step, his face ashen. His sycophants, who had been frozen in place, began to subtly distance themselves from him, their expressions shifting from fawning admiration to barely concealed panic. The ship was sinking, and they were all desperate not to be dragged down with it. Thorne's mind raced, scrambling for a lifeline. "Lawyers," he muttered, pulling out his phone. "I'll get my lawyers. We'll tie this up in court for a century. This gutter snipe will never see a dime." He began to dial, his fingers clumsy and shaking. But just as he was about to press call, an old, stooped man in a simple tweed coat stepped out from the crowd. He had been watching from the sidelines, his expression calm and observant. He walked with the help of a simple wooden cane, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marcus," the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong. Thorne looked up, His eyes narrowed. "And who the hell are you?" "My name is Arthur Thomas," the man said calmly. "I was your father's first corporate counsel, and I was Elias Vance's personal attorney and the executor of his estate." He tapped his breast pocket. "I drew up the trust myself. Every single clause is designed to be impervious to the kind of legal thuggery your family specializes in. You will not tie this up in court. You will be buried by it." Mr. Thomas, the man who had sent Leo the letter, he had been here all along, watching, waiting for the right moment. He was the keeper of the secret, the guardian of the legacy. Mr. Thomas turned his attention to Leo, who had paused at the door of Miss Reed's office. A warm, proud smile touched the old lawyer's lips. "Your grandfather knew this day might come, Leo. He knew the Thorne family's character. He knew they would not yield power gracefully." He then looked back at the stunned assembly. Elias Vance was a man of profound kindness. He helped countless people. He invested not just in businesses, but in human beings. When Thorne's father betrayed him, he ruined more than just one man. He destroyed livelihoods, families, dreams. But Elias never forgot them. A new wave of understanding rippled through the room. This was not just about a hidden stock portfolio. This was about a long-forgotten history, a battle between two opposing philosophies. The philosophy of Thorne, built on greed and predation, and the philosophy of Vance, built on integrity and community. Thorne, desperate and cornered, began his retaliation. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted, his voice cracking. He stormed over to Ms. Reed's desk, his face inches from hers. "You're in on it. You will freeze that trust account immediately, or I will call the regulators and accuse this entire branch of market manipulation." He was grasping at straws, using the only weapons he had left, intimidation and threats. But his power was already bleeding away. The fear he once inspired had curdled into contempt. "The only manipulation here, Marcus," Mr. Thomas said, his voice cutting through Thorne's rant, "was done by your father 40 years ago, and by you every day since. We have the proof." As if on cue, another figure emerged from the crowd, a woman in her late 50s, her face etched with a quiet, steely resolve. "My name is Clara Bellwether," she announced, her voice clear and strong. "My father owned Bellwether Steel. We were Thorne Industries' first major supplier. Your father used a fraudulent debt scheme to bankrupt us and absorb our assets for pennies on the dollar. My father died a broken man." She opened her briefcase. "But before he died, he gave me every piece of correspondence, every falsified invoice, every threatening letter. Elias Vance helped us try to fight it. He knew what was happening." She was the first soldier in the silent army. Thorne stared at her, his mind unable to process this new assault. It was as if the ghosts of his father's sins were all rising at once to drag him down. His world was not just unraveling, it was being systematically dismantled by a past he had never bothered to understand. "Your grandfather didn't just leave you shares, Leo," Mr. Thomas said, his gaze fixed on the young man. "He left you allies. He left you a legion of people who have been waiting for decades for a chance at justice. They have been waiting for you." The initial shock in the room was now transforming into something else entirely. It was the dawning realization that they were not witnessing a simple financial windfall. They were witnessing a reckoning, a long overdue moral correction, the gathering of a silent army ready to march in the name of a good man led by his unassuming heir. The escalation had begun, And Marcus Thorne was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. The boardroom on the 81st floor of Thorne Tower was Marcus Thorne's sanctuary. It was a space designed to project absolute power. A single monolithic table of polished obsidian stretched the length of the room, surrounded by 20 black leather chairs. One entire wall was a sheet of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a godlike view of the city sprawling below. For years, Thorne had sat at the head of this table, breaking rivals, firing executives, and shaping the city's skyline with the casual flick of a pen. Today, he was not sitting at its head. He was sitting on the side, a guest in his own kingdom. At the head of the table sat Leo Vance. He wore a simple, dark suit, a loan from Mr. Thomas. It was a size too big in the shoulders, but it didn't matter. No one was looking at his suit. They were looking at the quiet, unshakable authority in his eyes. Flanking him were Mr. Thomas and a small team of forensic accountants who had been working around the clock for the past week. Ms. Evelyn Reed from the bank was also present, seated next to them, a file of authenticated financial records in front of her. Across the vast table, Thorne was a study in barely controlled rage. His own lawyers sat beside him, their faces grim, shuffling papers that they knew were largely useless. The rest of the board members, a collection of the city's most influential figures, filled the remaining chairs. Their expressions were a mixture of anxiety, curiosity, and cold self-interest. They were here to see which way the wind was blowing and to make sure they ended up on the winning side. The emergency shareholder meeting had been called by Thorne himself. It was his final, desperate gambit. After a week of legal stonewalling and failed intimidation tactics, he had decided to take the fight to the board. His plan was to paint Leo as an illegitimate opportunist and to use a loophole in the corporate charter to challenge the validity of a 40-year-old trust. He believed his force of personality, his long history with the board, and a mountain of fabricated evidence would be enough to win them over. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Thorne began, his voice a strained attempt at its former commanding tone, "we are here today to address an unprecedented and frankly absurd situation. A person of no standing, a literal cleaner from the streets, has appeared with a fantastical claim to this company, a company my father and I built from the ground up." He gestured dismissively toward Leo. "This heir claims ownership through a dubious ancient document. My legal team has prepared a comprehensive report." He nodded to his lead lawyer, who began distributing thick bound documents to the board members. "This report proves conclusively that the funds used to establish this so-called Vanguard Trust were of illicit origin, part of a fraudulent scheme concocted by my father's disgraced ex-partner, Elias Vance. Therefore, the trust is null and void." He smirked, a flash of his old cruel confidence returning. It was a brilliant move, he thought. He wasn't just challenging the trust. He was retroactively assassinating the character of the man who created it. He was turning Leo's noble ancestor into a common criminal. To recognize this claim would be to legitimize fraud. It would expose this company to unimaginable legal and financial risk. We must vote to reject it, to protect the integrity of Thorne Industries. He sat back, his arms crossed, believing he had delivered an unassailable opening salvo. A heavy silence fell as the board members began to flip through the glossy, impressive-looking report. It was filled with complex charts, falsified balance sheets, and perjured affidavits, all meticulously crafted by Thorne's legal team. It was a masterpiece of deception. Leo did not look at the report. He did not flinch. He simply waited for Thorne to finish. When the room was quiet again, he leaned forward slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and clear, a stark contrast to Thorne's blustering performance. "The truth," Leo said, "is often much simpler than the lies constructed to hide it." He looked at the board members, his gaze direct and sincere. "Mr. Thorne is correct about one thing. This is about the integrity of this company. So let's talk about integrity." He nodded to Mr. Thomas. The old lawyer stood up, not with a glossy report, but with a single worn leather satchel. "Marcus Thorne speaks of his father's legacy," Thomas began, his voice resonating with the quiet authority of truth. "Let us examine that legacy." He pulled out a thin, aged file. "This is the file for Bellwether Steel. Its owner, John Bellwether, was a friend of Elias Vance. These documents," he laid them on the table, "are not fabrications. They are the original invoices, systematically altered by Thorne's father to create a phantom debt. This is the correspondence where he threatens to ruin John Bellwether if he does not sign over his company. This is not business. This is extortion." Clara Bellwether, who had been waiting in an adjoining room, was shown in. She stood before the board and gave a powerful, emotional testimony about the destruction of her family's business. Her story was not a chart or a graph. It was a human life, broken by greed. Next, Mr. Thomas called upon the quiet, unassuming accountant who had been fired by Thorne years ago. His name was David Chen. He walked to the head of the table and placed a single silver USB drive down. "Mr. Thorne's report is very impressive," Chen said, his voice steady despite the immense pressure. "Its only flaw is that it is completely false. For the past 5 years, before I was fired for insubordination, which was actually my refusal to cook the books for a quarterly report, I maintained a parallel ledger, a copy of the real, unedited financial records of this company." He looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose face had gone from confident to chalk white. "This drive contains that ledger. It details every secret offshore account, every embezzled dollar, every illegal stock buyback used to artificially inflate share prices. It details a pattern of systematic fraud that goes back not 40 years, but to the very day Marcus Thorne took over as CEO. He turned to the board. "The fraud isn't in the Vanguard Trust. The fraud is sitting right across from you." This was the final devastating blow. The silent army had delivered its ordnance. The board members looked from the USB drive to Thorne's horrified face. The narrative had been completely inverted. The accuser was now the accused. The judge was now the criminal. Ms. Evelyn Reed from the bank spoke up, her voice firm. "I can also confirm that our internal audit, prompted by the activation of the Vanguard Trust, has uncovered numerous irregularities in Mr. Thorne's personal and corporate accounts, all consistent with Mr. Chen's allegations. We have already filed a report with the federal financial regulators." The trap had been sprung. Every escape route was cut off. Thorne was surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the hard evidence of his present. Leo spoke again, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This was never about money for me. It was about honor. My grandfather built his life on a simple principle, that a person's wealth is not measured by what they accumulate, but by what they contribute. He built businesses, yes, but he also built communities. He helped people. He looked at Thorne, a hint of pity in his eyes. You and your father built an empire on a foundation of lies and theft, and today the foundation has crumbled. He then addressed the board directly. You have a choice. You can side with a legacy of corruption and face the consequences that are surely coming. Or you can vote for a new beginning, a chance to rebuild this company on the principles my grandfather championed: honesty, integrity, and respect. There was no need for a debate. The evidence was irrefutable. The moral choice was painfully clear. The chairman of the board, a man who had been a close ally of Thorne's for 20 years, slowly pushed the fabricated report to the center of the table. He looked at Thorne, his eyes cold with betrayal. I call for a vote, the chairman said, his voice heavy. A vote of no confidence in CEO Marcus Thorne, and a second vote to recognize Leo Vance as representative of the Vanguard Trust, as the controlling shareholder, and to appoint him interim chairman. The verdict was swift and unanimous. One by one, the hands went up. For Thorne's removal, for Leo's appointment. Each raised hand was a nail in the coffin of Thorne's reign. Thorne sat motionless, his face a blank mask of utter devastation. He had walked into this room a king. He would leave it a pariah. His final gambit had failed spectacularly. The protagonist's counterattack, delivered not with rage, but with quiet, relentless truth, had completely dismantled him. As the meeting concluded, 2 uniformed officers and a pair of stern-faced detectives in suits entered the boardroom. They had been waiting, alerted by Ms. Reed and the federal regulators. They walked directly to Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne, one of the detectives said, his voice devoid of emotion, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The click of handcuffs snapping around Thorne's wrists was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of an era ending, the sound of justice, long delayed, finally arriving. He was pulled to his feet, his arrogant posture gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of a defeated man. As they led him away, he looked back one last time at Leo. His eyes were not filled with anger anymore. They were filled with a hollow, terrifying emptiness. He was a man who had lost everything because he believed he was entitled to everything. He was led out of the boardroom, past the giant window overlooking his former kingdom, a humiliated, broken man, utterly and completely alone. The downfall was absolute. The war was over. In the sudden, profound quiet of the boardroom, Leo Vance finally let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for his entire life. The weight of the struggle, the tension of the confrontation, the immense pressure of the last week, it all came crashing down on him. He slumped back in the massive chairman's chair, the leather sighing under his slight frame. He felt not triumphant, but exhausted. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since this ordeal began, he let the mask of calm resolve fall away. He thought of his grandmother, Elena. Her face, so often clouded with pain and worry, was the reason he had walked into that bank. He had been fighting for her, for the simple, desperate hope of giving her a few more years of peace. Now, in the aftermath of this cataclysmic victory, that simple hope was the only thing that felt real. The company, the shares, the immense power that had just been thrust upon him, it all felt abstract, a dream from which he might yet wake up. Mr. Thomas placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He would be so proud of you, Leo, the old lawyer said, his voice thick with emotion. Your grandfather, he never wanted revenge. He wanted restoration. He believed that good deeds were seeds and that one day they would yield a harvest. Today was the harvest. Leo opened his eyes, and to his own surprise, he felt tears welling up. They were not tears of sadness or even joy, but of a deep, cathartic release. Years of pent-up pain, of quiet struggle, of feeling small and invisible in a world that celebrated the big and the loud, finally overflowed. He had not just won a battle against a corporate tyrant. He had reclaimed his family's honor. He had proven that his grandfather's quiet integrity was more powerful than Thorne's loud, empty avarice. His first act as the new head of the company was not to issue a press release or meet with investors. He picked up the phone on the obsidian desk, the one Marcus Thorne had used to ruin lives, and made a personal call. He spoke to the country's top cardiac surgeon, the very doctor whose fees had seemed like an insurmountable mountain just a week ago. "My grandmother's name is Elena Vance," Leo said, his voice clear and firm. "I want you to schedule her surgery for as soon as possible. Spare no expense. Give her the best care in the world." He paused, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time, "and send the bill to my office." His second act followed immediately. He called an emergency meeting with the heads of human resources and operations. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice echoing with an authority that felt both strange and natural. "We are overhauling the employee health care plan. It will be the best in the industry. 100% coverage for all employees and their immediate families. No exceptions. No one who works for this company will ever have to choose between their health and their finances again." He then turned to the factory operations manager. "And the planned closure of the Dayton manufacturing plant is canceled. We are not laying off 2,000 workers. We are investing in that plant. We are retraining those workers. We are going to make it a model of modern, ethical manufacturing." The news spread through the company like wildfire. Fear was replaced by hope. Cynicism was replaced by a tentative, blossoming loyalty. The employees, so long treated as numbers on a spreadsheet by Thorne, were suddenly being treated as human beings. Leo Vance was not just a new CEO, he was a revolution. That evening, as the city lights began to glitter in the twilight, Mr. Thomas found Leo standing alone by the massive boardroom window. He was not looking down at the city like a conqueror, but like a guardian, his expression thoughtful and heavy with the weight of his new reality. "There is one last thing from your grandfather," Mr. Thomas said softly. He held out a simple, sealed envelope, different from the first. This one was addressed simply to "my grandson." Leo took it, his fingers tracing the familiar, elegant script. He opened it and read the final message from the man who had set all of this in motion. It was not a letter about business or strategy. It was a letter about life. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then the world has tested you and you have proven yourself worthy. You now hold a great deal of power. Many will tell you that power is a weapon. Do not listen to them. Power is a tool. With it, you can build walls or you can build bridges. You can forge chains or you can forge keys. You can hoard your wealth in a fortress or you can plant it like seeds in a garden for others to enjoy. I hid our family's legacy not to spring a trap of revenge, but to preserve a chance for a different kind of wealth. The Thorne family believes that value is something you take. I have always believed it is something you create. Their legacy is one of extraction and decay. Let yours be one of growth and restoration. Do not let this new world change who you are. Remember the small apartment, the taste of cheap coffee, the feeling of being invisible. Let that memory be your compass. It will always point you toward empathy. It will always point you toward what is right. Your grandmother and I never cared for riches. We cared for a life of purpose. You now have the means to live a life of immense purpose. Build gardens, my boy, not walls. The world has enough walls. With all my love and pride, your grandfather, Elias. Leo folded the letter, his heart full. The tears were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and clarity. He finally understood. He had not inherited a fortune. He had inherited a mission. The resolution was not about defeating Thorn. It was about honoring Elias. It was about healing the wounds of the past by building a better future. He looked out at the sprawling city, not as a collection of assets, but as a garden waiting to be tended. 10 years later, the imposing skyscraper that had once been known as Thorn Tower now bore a different name, etched in elegant, understated brass letters above its entrance, the Vance Center. The building itself had been transformed. The cold, intimidating lobby was gone, replaced with a warm, open space featuring a public art gallery and a small historical museum dedicated to the city's industrial roots. The air no longer smelled of expensive, sterile success, but of fresh coffee from a subsidized cafe that was a favorite haunt for students and local artists. The Vance Center was no longer a monument to one man's ego. It had become a hub for the community, a symbol of ethical commerce and civic pride. Leo Vance, now 35, was one of the most respected figures in the city. Yet he remained a man of profound humility. He had resisted the trappings of immense wealth, choosing to live in a comfortable but modest home not far from the neighborhood where he grew up. He was rarely seen in the society pages or at lavish galas. Instead, he was most often seen at community board meetings, at the opening of a new public park, or walking the floors of the factories he had saved and revitalized. He had not forgotten the feel of a cleaner's uniform, and he treated every employee from the executive suite to the mailroom with the same quiet respect. His greatest achievement was not the soaring stock price of his company, but the Elias Vance Foundation. Funded with a significant portion of the company's profits, the foundation had become a powerful force for good throughout the city and beyond. It provided scholarships for underprivileged students, offered seed funding for small ethical businesses, and ran a program that provided free world-class legal and medical care for the elderly and infirm. It was a living embodiment of his grandfather's philosophy, wealth used as a tool for growth and restoration. One crisp autumn afternoon, Leo was walking through a newly renovated park in a formerly neglected part of the city. The park, with its beautiful landscaping and modern playground, was another of the foundation's projects. He saw a young woman sitting on a bench, surrounded by a pile of heavy textbooks, her face a mask of stress and exhaustion. She was staring at a tuition bill, her expression one of quiet despair. The image was so familiar it felt like looking into a mirror that reflected his own past. He saw his own desperation, his own feeling of being trapped by circumstances beyond its control. He approached her gently, so as not to startle her. "It's a heavy load to carry," he said, his voice soft. The young woman looked up, surprised. "I'm sorry?" "The books," Leo said with a small smile, gesturing to the pile. and the worries that come with them. I remember that feeling well. They began to talk. Her name was Maria. She was a brilliant engineering student, the first in her family to ever attend university. She worked 2 part-time jobs, but had just been hit with an unexpected tuition increase. She was on the verge of having to drop out, her dreams turning to dust. I don't know what I'm going to do, she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. It feels impossible. Leo listened patiently. When she was finished, he looked at her with kind, understanding eyes. "What if it wasn't impossible?" he asked. He pulled a simple business card from his wallet. It didn't say CEO or chairman. It just had his name and the logo of the Vance Foundation. "My name is Leo Vance," he said. "I run a foundation that helps students just like you. I want you to go to the financial aid office tomorrow morning. Tell them I sent you. The Elias Vance Foundation will be covering your full tuition and providing you with a living stipend for the remainder of your degree." Maria stared at him, then at the card, her mind struggling to comprehend. "But why? You don't even know me." Leo's smile was warm and genuine. "Because a long time ago, when I was at my lowest point, the legacy of a good man gave me a chance. He believed in helping people he didn't know. I'm just paying it forward." It was the full circle moment, the closing of a loop that had begun with a desperate act in a cold bank lobby. He was no longer the recipient of a legacy. He was the creator of one. As for Marcus Thorne, his fate served as the city's quiet cautionary tale. He had served 7 years in a federal prison for his crimes. Upon his release, he was a ghost of his former self, his fortune gone, his name a synonym for disgrace, his arrogance shattered. Clara Bellwether, the woman whose family he had helped ruin, had, in an act of incredible grace, offered him a simple administrative job at her now thriving logistics company. It was a chance at redemption, a path back to a life of quiet dignity. But Thorne, even in his ruin, was still a prisoner of his own pride. He was too proud to accept charity, especially from a victim. He refused the offer and vanished into the anonymity of the city he once commanded. He was occasionally spotted, a gaunt gray figure in a threadbare coat, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had long since forgotten him. He was the final tragic proof of his own father's philosophy. A life built on taking things ultimately leaves you with nothing. That evening, Leo stood once more in his office, looking out at the glittering expanse of the city. The lights twinkled like a million tiny promises. He saw not a kingdom to be ruled, but a community to be served. He had learned the most important lesson his grandfather had tried to teach him. True power was not in the ability to command, but in the capacity to care. The seeds of kindness his grandfather had planted so many years ago had grown into a vast, thriving forest, providing shade and shelter for countless people. The harvest, he now knew, would be eternal.